April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above the Bay of Biscay. The roar of 4 Pratt & Whitney engines thundered through the night sky, vibrating the rivets of the B-24 Liberator's fuselage. Inside, the red glow of instrument panels bathed the cramped interior in a dim, hellish light. Outside, the Atlantic stretched black and featureless, as if the world had ceased to exist beyond the nose cone. Lieutenant Jack Hawk Hollingsworth leaned over his radar console, eyes locked on the flickering phosphorescent screen. A trained operator might have called the image a smear of green fog, but to Hawk, it was a symphony of ghostly echoes. He gently twisted a dial with one gloved hand. The screen sharpened. "There," he murmured into his throat mic. "Surface contact, 250 degrees, 12 miles, small group, 3 targets, moving slow." From the cockpit, the pilot, Captain Frank Garrison, responded coolly. "Roger that, Hawk. Get ready, boys." Tension spiked through the crew. Waist gunners snapped ammo belts into place. The belly turret hissed as it rotated. In the nose, Lieutenant Sam Carter adjusted the elevation of the Leigh Light, a powerful searchlight mounted under the aircraft's belly. They were hunting ghosts in pitch darkness. But tonight, they carried the power of daylight itself. Below them, 60 feet above the waves, 3 German vessels steamed westward. One was a Type 9 U-boat, recently surfaced for recharge. Alongside it, a Milch Kua supply submarine, known as a milk cow, restocked her with fuel and torpedoes. A third shadow, an escorting torpedo boat, zigzagged cautiously on the perimeter. On the U-boat's conning tower, Oberleutnant zur See Heinrich Kubler squinted into the blackness. The Atlantic air smelled of diesel, salt, and rust. His hands clutched cold binoculars, though they showed him nothing. The moon was a weak sliver, half veiled by fast-moving clouds. "Radar sweep clear," his communications officer called from below, after scanning with the U-boat's primitive FUMO 29 set. Kubler nodded, unconvinced. Something didn't feel right. Back above, Hawk watched the green shapes drift slowly across the screen. They hadn't even known these ships were out here. Radar had found them in less than a minute. Intelligence reports claimed the Germans had recently improved their radio silence and night convoy tactics. Didn't matter. American technology had quietly leapt ahead. The aircraft's radar, the SCR-717, pulsed unseen energy into the dark sea. Every 5 seconds, it painted an invisible cone miles wide. Whatever the waves tried to hide, steel hulls, conning towers, wakes, it revealed. Hawk keyed his mic again. "Closing to visual. Sam, prep the light." "Copy," Carter replied. "Leigh Light hot." Down below, Kubler suddenly jerked upright. He'd felt it. No sound, no visual, just instinct. He opened his mouth to order a dive when a blinding cone of white light erupted from the heavens. The night turned to fire. The B-24 had descended to barely 1,000 feet before switching on the Leigh Light, perfectly timed over the U-boat. The sea illuminated like it had been struck by lightning. Every rivet on the conning tower glistened. Sailors dove for cover. Cannon fire roared from the Liberator. Tracers sliced through the air, hammering into the supply sub. Explosions followed. 1, 2, 3. The torpedo boat returned fire blindly, its flak tearing up the sky as the American bomber wheeled overhead for another pass. "Dive! Dive! Dive!" Kubler screamed. Too late. The U-boat's deck was shredded. The milk cow took a direct hit to its pressure hull. Shouts and screams echoed across the water before being swallowed by a fireball. Inside the B-24, Carter whooped over the intercom. "Direct hit. Confirmed splash on the second contact." Garrison circled for confirmation. Flames licked the surface far below, but 2 of the radar echoes were gone. Hawk checked his screen, clean, save for the retreating blip of the torpedo boat. "Returning to base," Garrison said. "Tell the boys they did good tonight." Back in Lorient, France, the news landed like a bombshell. Kubler survived, barely, and submitted a full report. In it, he described the attack as inhumanly precise. No warning, no sonar pings, no moonlight, just sudden, devastating force from above. Luftwaffe radar technicians were baffled. U-boat command forwarded Kubler's account to OKM, Oberkommando der Marine, with a scribbled note in the margins. "They see in the dark, we do not." Whispers began to spread. The Allies had some unnatural advantage, something beyond comprehension. Some even called it supernatural. May 1943, Wright Field, Ohio. In a Spartan operations hangar bristling with antenna arrays and chalkboard equations, Captain Alan Temple adjusted his lab coat and pointed to the rotating antenna dome mounted on the testbed B-24 parked just outside. "This is the SCR-717, he said, voice low with quiet pride. 10-centimeter band. Pulse power over 70 kilowatts. Azimuth accuracy within 1 degree. The British scientists nodded appreciatively. Engineers from RAF Coastal Command had flown in to review the latest American radar suite, the product of a top-secret transatlantic tech collaboration codenamed Tizard. The heart of the system, the cavity magnetron, a British invention, had been refined, miniaturized, and mass-produced in the United States. Temple tapped a chart showing wave propagation paths. At night, over the Atlantic, the only thing more invisible than a surface submarine is the plane hunting it. Until now. Meanwhile, at sea, the impact of this technological leap was already being felt. By early summer, U-boat crews were paranoid wrecks. It wasn't just the devastating loss of life. It was the mystery. Convoys they had once stalked with impunity were now defended by phantom aircraft. Long-range liberators with massive fuel tanks patrolled the Bay of Biscay, picking off refueling subs in what the Germans began calling der Todesschirm, the death canopy. A young U-boat radio man, Oberfunkmat Fritz Ressel, wrote in his diary, "We surface only briefly, and still they find us. Even without moonlight, even in fog, the light comes from nowhere, and then the fire begins. I believe they can see through the clouds." German naval intelligence started compiling reports. More than 40 sightings in the span of 2 months where U-boats had been attacked at night, in conditions previously thought safe. In Berlin, Admiral Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, paced furiously before a war room map pinned with black and red flags. His dream of strangling Britain with submarine warfare was unraveling. "We are losing the night," he barked to his staff. "How?" The Luftwaffe's radar scientists, who still relied on the outdated Seetakt and FUMO series sets, could offer no satisfying answers. The few MB-1 METOX receivers, designed to detect Allied radar signals, were proving unreliable. In fact, they may have been worse than useless. Unbeknownst to the Germans, METOX leaked tiny electromagnetic emissions, which Allied aircraft could detect. Their countermeasure was helping the Allies find them faster. Back in the field, the hunter-killer groups grew bolder. American radar operators developed a new tactic, a quick burst pass. Upon detecting a radar return, the aircraft would dive low, accelerate toward the target, and switch on the Leigh Light only within 500 yards, minimizing reaction time. Hawk Hollingsworth led one such mission in early July. The conditions were brutal. Storm fronts, 40-knot winds, rolling seas. Yet the radar painted 3 distinct targets less than 10 miles out. "You trust the radar now?" Garrison asked him over the intercom. Hawk's response was instant. I trust it more than my eyes. They attacked. 2 vessels sunk, one heavily damaged and forced to beach near the Spanish coast. When survivors were later interrogated, they spoke in hushed voices about the American ghost plane. The effect was demoralizing. German High Command began receiving field reports with increasingly unscientific language. Terms like witchcraft, hell light, and airborne hunting spirits crept into otherwise formal debriefings. Some captains insisted the Americans were using heat rays or advanced sound detection. To many sailors, there was no rational explanation. One night you surfaced, and minutes later, you were on fire. There was no escaping it. Admiral Dönitz demanded new technology. In response, the Kriegsmarine introduced the Naxos radar detector. It was a rushed solution, barely tested. And though it could detect 10-centimeter waves, its range was pathetic. Worse still, the Americans were already rotating frequencies. By August 1943, the tide was turning. Allied forces now had almost total dominance over the night seas. Convoy losses plummeted, U-boat kills skyrocketed, and the German command, once confident in their wolfpacks, was suddenly questioning whether the enemy had unlocked something more than technology, whether they had gained foresight. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying for the Germans. The Allies had taken the invisible battlefield of radio waves and made it visible. The sea was no longer dark, and the night was no longer safe. September 18th, 1943, Mid-Atlantic Gap. The midnight air was freezing, thin, and deathly quiet, until the faint mechanical whir of rotating antennae disturbed the stillness inside the Liberator. Lieutenant Nora Callahan hunched over the SCR 717 display aboard her PB4Y1, eyes narrowed. She was among the first wave of female radar officers embedded with naval air crews, chosen for her sharp instincts and quicker-than-average calibration time. 4 echoes, tight group, estimated heading 090, she reported crisply. Course toward convoy HX 255, the pilot, Commander Bill Myron, asked. Couldn't be anything else. This is a textbook wolfpack. Myron's jaw set as he turned the Liberator into the wind. All right, let's give 'em hell. They were hundreds of miles from the nearest land, over the deepest part of the Atlantic. For years this stretch, dubbed the Black Pit, had been outside the range of land-based air support. U-boats thrived here. But now, with new fuel tanks, radar, and Leigh Lights, aircraft like this one could reach it. The hunters had entered the wolves' den. Below, 4 U-boats ran surfaced in line-ahead formation, recharging batteries as they prepared to intercept the inbound convoy. The lead boat, U-578, was commanded by Kapitän Leutnant Emil Horstmann, a veteran of a dozen successful patrols. His crew, confident in their spacing and supposed radio silence, had no idea they were being watched from above. The radar on their own boat had detected nothing. But in the belly of the Liberator, Callahan tracked them like glowing embers against a canvas of darkness. She fed real-time vector updates to the bombardier. They dropped depth charges from high altitude first, 4 in succession. Huge plumes of white water and fire erupted across the sea. Then came the light. The second attack run opened with the Leigh Light flaring on just above U-578. Panic spread among the German crew as 50 cal rounds slammed across the deck and the shriek of engines cut through the wind. Horstmann tried to order a crash dive, but shrapnel ripped through the conning tower. The U-boat staggered, listing as it began to flood. Only 3 men escaped. The rest vanished beneath the Black Sea. That same week, intelligence from Bletchley Park confirmed what the radar already suspected. German Admiral Dönitz had ordered Rudeltaktik, or pack tactics, to focus entirely on attacking at night. The assumption had been that Allied aircraft couldn't find them without visual contact. That assumption was now fatally wrong. The Allies intercepted U-boat communications showing increasing desperation. Reports read, "Night attack impossible. Enemy aircraft arrive without warning. Milk cow destroyed. Cannot resupply. Radar detection failed. Belief, enemy knows our position before surfacing." To the men aboard the U-boats, it felt like the ocean was telling the Allies where they were. The Germans had no idea that every time they surfaced, they painted a bullseye in the sky. One only radar could see. In Washington, D.C., scientists at the radiation laboratory at MIT, codenamed the Rad Lab, pushed radar technology even further. They improved antenna gain, reduced clutter, and miniaturized components. New versions of the SCR-717 included faster refresh rates and expanded range bands, making it easier for inexperienced operators to spot ships against choppy waves. Simultaneously, British Coastal Command adapted these advances into their own aircraft, like the Sunderland and the Wellington. The Atlantic became a graveyard. By December 1943, the statistics were undeniable. Allied aircraft had sunk 73 U-boats in a single month, many of them at night, most of them tracked and engaged via radar. To survive, U-boat crews began staying submerged for days, even if it meant slowly suffocating their own men. Some captains refused to surface at all, fearing what they called der Strahlentod, the beam of death. In a coded personal letter to Admiral Dönitz, one U-boat commander wrote, "The sea has betrayed us. The night, once our ally, has been stolen. Even with Naxos receivers finally deployed, the damage was done." Allied radar was now rotating frequencies, adapting faster than the German countermeasures could catch up. Worse, the Luftwaffe still hadn't fielded anything close in power or range. Their best night fighter units still relied on cumbersome ground-based radar vectors and lucky interceptions. Meanwhile, every American patrol plane carried a self-contained kill system that could see beyond sight and strike before the enemy even knew it was near. Radar had quietly become the deadliest weapon of the Atlantic War. And for German commanders still clinging to old strategies, it was incomprehensible. January 5, 1944. RAF Coastal Command, St. Evil Airfield, Cornwall. Rain lashed against the hangar roof like machine gun fire. Inside, squadron leader Arthur Grim Graves zipped up his flight jacket and eyed the black Wellington Mk XIII bomber parked on the tarmac. Beneath its dull frame, the aircraft held secrets. A new air-to-surface vessel, ASV radar, Mk XIII, 10-centimeter band, using the same cavity magnetron core the Americans had harnessed, was wired into the aircraft's underbelly. Beside it, a newly calibrated Leigh Light. Coastal Command had watched and learned from the Americans in the Bay of Biscay. Now it was their turn to bring the light. "Contact to the west, 12 miles. Lone signal. Could be a straggler," said the operator beside him. Graves didn't hesitate. "Gear up. Let's take the light to him." At sea, U-759 wallowed through 10-foot waves, wounded from a prior engagement and leaking fuel. Its commander, Oberleutnant Friedrich Hellner, had risked surfacing for fresh air and battery recharge. He figured they had less than 10 minutes before another dive. He was wrong. Just 6 minutes after surfacing, the British bomber was overhead. Graves kept the Leigh Light off until the final seconds. By then, they were practically skimming the waves. The blinding beam exploded from under the fuselage, cutting through rain and dark like divine judgment. Hellner screamed for a crash dive. But the first salvo of depth charges hit before the order could be executed. The sea ripped open in columns of white water, and the U-boat disappeared beneath it. No survivors were ever recovered. By spring of 1944, radar had become the unchallenged monarch of nocturnal warfare. The Americans continued refining their SCR-7 WWII, integrating it with the improved AN/APS-3 systems for even sharper target resolution. These could detect a conning tower from 15 miles away, sometimes more in cold air conditions. Meanwhile, British aircraft carried Fish Pond, a tail-mounted radar display that warned of approaching U-boats from below and behind, negating the surprise of night surface ambushes. In the past, the night had been the U-boat's kingdom. Now, it was a death trap. The Bay of Biscay, once a highway for German submarines to reach open ocean, had become a killing field. Allied aircraft, flying in radar-guided patrol boxes, systematically eliminated surfacing U-boats. Many were hit within minutes of breaking the waves. In one grim week in April, 12 U-boats were lost in the bay alone. Meanwhile, German morale deteriorated rapidly. U-boat training schools began reporting high psychological stress among recruits. Instructors warned that even simulations of radar attacks induced panic. Sleep deprivation, hallucinations, and onboard mutiny became disturbingly common. The phrase Leigh Light became synonymous with terror. Crews whispered of it in hushed tones, as if it were some monstrous eye that watched from the sky. They called it das Höllenlicht, the hell light. Some boats were ordered to dive immediately at the faintest trace of aircraft noise, even if it meant abandoning resupply operations. Others began modifying paint schemes, hull angles, anything to make them less detectable to radar sweeps. It didn't matter. Radar didn't see paint. Radar saw truth. High Command was forced to confront reality. In a stormy meeting at the Kriegsmarine's Berlin headquarters, Admiral Dönitz pounded the table. "We are sending our men to die in the dark. You have promised us countermeasures. Where are they?" His radar specialists mumbled about ongoing work. New detectors like Naxos-Z in Tunis, experimental radar-absorbent coatings, even rumors of a snorkel device that would allow diesel engines to operate while submerged. Dönitz snapped. "You're telling me we'll have a solution in 6 months?" He gestured at the mounting casualty lists. "We'll have no boats left in 6 months." In the skies above, the Allies continued refining their deadly rhythm. Crews grew so confident in radar that they began preemptively attacking areas where no U-boat had yet been seen, knowing the technology would find something. Night flights became clockwork. Contact, illumination, destruction, the once mighty wolfpacks had become prey. And German officers, many of them veterans of successful early war operations, found themselves baffled. Not just by the efficiency of the Allied attacks, but by the sheer precision. How could a plane flying at night with no line of sight find a black boat in a black sea and hit it within seconds? To those raised on the doctrine of stealth, it felt like witchcraft, a violation of the natural order of war. And so, by mid-1944, the phrase spread among U-boat captains: "The Americans have eyes in the dark." What they didn't realize, what most of them never learned, is that the night hadn't betrayed them. They had simply underestimated the power of something they couldn't see, something they didn't understand. And by the time they realized it, it was already too late. June 6, 1944. Off the coast of Normandy, D-Day. As the greatest amphibious assault in human history unfolded along the French coast, the remnants of the once feared U-boat fleet stirred in their pens. Orders had come directly from Admiral Dönitz: intercept and destroy the invasion fleet at all costs. But few boats ever made it beyond the shallow shelf of the French coast. Allied radar pickets were already watching. Flying overhead in layered patrol rings, aircraft from RAF Coastal Command and the U.S. Navy used high-powered radar to monitor every square mile of sea. SCR-71 sets scanned in long sweeps, painting each surfaced vessel in ghostly detail. If a U-boat dared breach the surface, even briefly, it was spotted. Just after midnight, U-390 crept out of the port of Brest. By 3:40 a.m., a Canadian Canso flying boat detected her on radar and dropped depth charges. She exploded before even reaching deep water. She was one of 14 U-boats destroyed in the first 3 days of the invasion. Dönitz's last hope of a surprise counterattack from the sea died in those early hours. In desperation, Germany turned to experimental technology. In the summer of 1944, a new modification was rushed into service: the Schnorchel, or snorkel, a retractable air mast that allowed U-boats to run diesel engines while submerged. It offered stealth, in theory. The hope was that U-boats could avoid radar detection entirely. But the reality was grim. The snorkels were fragile, prone to failure in heavy seas, and, more importantly, not invisible to radar. The 10-centimeter wavelength of Allied sets could still pick up the thin metal masts if the sea was calm. And worse, the use of snorkels trapped exhaust gases inside the hull, leading to carbon monoxide poisoning and crew sickness. One U-boat commander described it as being slowly gassed in a steel coffin. The advantage radar gave to the Allies was not just tactical, it was psychological. German sailors were dying not just from bombs and bullets, but from fear and despair. By autumn, radar had killed the U-boat dream. The wolfpacks disbanded. The milk cow supply fleet was wiped out. German industrial production couldn't keep pace with the losses. Training new crews became pointless when the average lifespan of a deployed submarine was now less than a month. The statistics told the story clearly. In 1942, the U-boat arm had sunk over 6 million tons of Allied shipping. By late 1944, that number dropped below 500,000 tons, even as Allied traffic surged with invasion forces. The ocean no longer belonged to Germany. It had been retaken, not by superior numbers, nor by brute force, but by invisible beams sweeping the night sea. And in Berlin, as bombs began to fall closer to the city, Admiral Dönitz prepared for the end. He issued one final directive to surviving U-boat captains: operate submerged at all times, surface only to receive coded orders, and avoid contact unless unavoidable. The once aggressive doctrine of unrestricted submarine warfare had collapsed into a strategy of evasion and survival. One captain, in his final patrol log before his boat was lost, scribbled, "No longer are we the hunters. We are shadows, running from a light that never blinks." By May 1945, it was over. Germany surrendered. The last operational U-boats were scuttled or captured. Dönitz, briefly appointed Führer after Hitler's death, was arrested by Allied forces. When interrogated about the failure of his fleet, he famously said, "We could not fight what we could not see." The truth was harsher. Germany had been outthought, outbuilt, out-technologized. American and British radar had taken the stealthiest force in naval history and exposed it. In the years following the war, Allied commanders and scientists gave credit where it was due, not to the bombs, nor the planes, nor even the brave crews, but to the invisible pulses of energy sent across sky and sea. To the cavity magnetron, the SCR-7 was MT, the ASV Mk XIII. To the radar operators who stared at green screens in dark cabins and turned shadows into targets. German officers had believed their U-boats were safe beneath the stars. But technology had rewritten the laws of war. In the dark, the Allies could now see.